Did you sell Mom's house for $280,000? That was the first sentence my son said, when I had just locked the door that had sheltered our family for 41 years. Not a word of greeting, not asking where I was. There was only anger in Mark's voice, so sharp that I had to move the phone away from my ear. In front of me, the sold sign was planted at an angle on the lawn. Behind the window glass, the house was mostly empty. No more family photos on the walls. No more footsteps on the stairs. There was only the old oak table in the dining room, and a brown envelope placed right in the middle of the table. On the face of the envelope, I wrote 3 names: Mark, Sarah, Luke. "Are you listening to me?" Mark shouted. "You sold the house without telling us. The contract was just finalized this morning." "I know." The realtor posted a picture of handing over the keys online. "The whole town knew before your own children did." I looked at the pickup truck by the curb. Everything I brought with me just fit in 2 suitcases and a cardboard box. "I was going to tell you tonight, after the money was already in your account." I stayed silent. That silence made Mark even angrier. "$280,000, right? Right." He let out a laugh, a cold laugh that I had never heard from my son before. "Mom just passed away over a year ago. You sold her garden, her kitchen, the room we grew up in, and then walked away with $280,000. I didn't walk away with $280,000. Then where is the money?" Before I answered, the phone switched to a group call. Sarah appeared on the screen with red eyes. Luke sat in his car, silently looking down at his hands. Mark had called both of them. Sarah spoke first. "Did you really sell it?" "Yes. You know Mom wanted to keep the house for the family." I looked up at the second-floor bedroom window. The white curtains my wife sewed herself were still there. "I know, then why?" Mark cut in. "Because he needs money. Do you think I sold the house for money? If not, then for what?" I turned back to look at the house one last time. On the kitchen door frame, there used to be pencil marks measuring the height of 3 children. I had cut that piece of wood out before handing over the house. It was lying next to the envelope. "You guys come here at 6 o'clock, I said. "Will you explain?" Sarah asked. "No." All 3 fell silent. Luke looked up. "You won't be there?" "No." Mark clenched his jaw. "So you plan to leave a letter explaining how you just sold our entire childhood?" "There's not just a letter in the envelope." "What is in there?" I looked through the glass door. Inside was the closing disclosure for the house sale. The bank's past due notice. 3 folders, each bearing a child's name. And the last letter my wife wrote before she died. A letter she requested I only open when the house no longer belonged to us. "The truth," I said. Mark shook his head. "You always think you're the only one who knows the truth." "No, Mark." I placed the house key on the envelope and pulled the door shut. "I am just the only one who knows this house was sold long before today." I hung up the call. The phone immediately vibrated. I did not answer. At exactly 6 in the evening, my 3 children would step into the empty house and open that envelope. They thought they were about to discover what I did with $280,000. But what was waiting for them inside was much more painful. Because the house didn't disappear because I sold it. It had disappeared piece by piece. During the years, I used it to save the life of each of my children. I was not there when my children opened the envelope. But months later, Sarah recounted to me almost every minute of that evening. Mark filled in the parts she didn't remember, and Luke only corrected them on a single detail. None of the 3 stepped into the house before 6 o'clock. They stood in the yard for nearly 10 minutes, under the sold sign, arguing over who should open the door. Mark arrived first. He parked his pickup truck right in the middle of the driveway, as if simply blocking that path would stop the new buyers from taking the house away from the family. Sarah arrived next, carrying the box of Mom's photos that she had taken away last week. Luke was the last to appear. He brought nothing. According to Sarah, Luke stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the second-floor window for a long time. That used to be his bedroom. It was also the room we had to change the lock on 3 times during the worst years. Mark reached for the spare key under the flower pot. The key was no longer there. He took the spare key too, Mark said. Dad left the key on the table. Sarah replied. He already said so. Then how do we get in? Luke reached into his jacket pocket and took out an old silver key. Dad gave me this when I was 16. Mark looked at him. You still kept it. Luke did not answer. He opened the door. All 3 stepped into the nearly empty house. No ticking clock in the living room. No bookshelves. No armchair where their mother used to sit and knit every evening. When the furniture disappeared, the house became smaller than they remembered. Every footstep echoed on the wooden floor, rebounding through the rooms like the sound of strangers walking in a place that didn't belong to them. Sarah was the first to see the dining table. It was the only piece of furniture I hadn't moved out. The oak table I built the winter Mark turned 5. One leg was once broken when Luke climbed on it to get cookies. I fixed it but could never completely hide the crack. The envelope lay right in the middle of the table. The house key was placed on it. Next to it was the piece of wood, with pencil marks measuring the height of all 3 children. As soon as Sarah saw it, she burst into tears. He cut the whole door frame. Mark stepped forward and picked up the piece of wood. He sold the house but kept this for what? Luke stood behind. Maybe because it's the only part Dad could take with him. Mark slammed the piece of wood down on the table. Don't start defending him. I haven't defended anyone. Dad sold the house without telling us. I know. He kept the money. We don't know that yet. Mark turned to his younger brother. You heard him. $280,000. That is the sale price. What's the difference? Luke looked at the envelope. Maybe that's the reason we are here. Mark pulled out a chair and sat down, but didn't open the envelope right away. Sarah sat opposite him. She placed the box of Mom's photos on her lap, holding it tight with both hands, as if afraid someone would take it away. Luke remained standing. On the face of the envelope, below the 3 names, I had written an additional small line. Read in order. Do not skip any pages. Mark looked at that line and let out a faint laugh. Even when he's not here, Dad still wants to give orders. Sarah wiped her tears. Can you stop being angry for 5 minutes? I have to be angry for all 3 of us. No one asked you to do that. Aren't you angry? Sarah looked around the empty kitchen. I don't know what I'm feeling. Mark turned to Luke. What about you? Luke leaned his back against the wall. I just want to know why Dad said the house was sold long ago. Mark tore the edge of the envelope. Inside, there were so many documents that a portion slid down onto the table. On top was a stack of documents clipped together with a metal staple. The first page had the title, Closing Disclosure. Mark skimmed through the lines and stopped at the bolded number. Sale price, $280,000. Here, he pushed the paper towards Sarah. Dad didn't lie about the price. Sarah didn't look at that line. She pointed to the bottom of the page. Keep reading. Mark pulled the paper back. Below the sale price was a list of deductions. Remaining mortgage balance. Second mortgage loan. Unpaid property taxes. Brokerage fees. Closing costs. A secured debt that Mark didn't recognize. He read each number. slowing down after every line. $52,400, $142,600, $27,800, $16,900. Finally, in the bottom right corner, was the actual amount the seller received after the transaction. Net proceeds to seller, $40,300. No one said anything. Sarah reached out to take the paper and read that number twice. 40,300. Mark snatched it back. Impossible. It says it right there. Dad could have transferred the money before selling. Luke pulled out a chair and sat down. Then let's look at the rest. Mark flipped to the second page. There was a bank statement, clearly showing an additional mortgage loan, opened 12 years ago. The original loan was not $142,600. It had increased due to interest extensions and making only minimum payments. Sarah looked at the date the loan was opened. 12 years ago, she calculated in her head. That was the year your company had trouble. Mark looked up. Unrelated, Sarah didn't continue. Mark quickly flipped to the next page. It was a past due notice. The bank demanded payment of the entire debt balance or a resolution plan before September 30th. Otherwise, they had the right to begin foreclosure proceedings. The house sale date was September 18th, 12 days before the deadline. Sarah put her hand over her mouth. Dad didn't sell the house to get the money. Mark stood up abruptly. Not necessarily. You just read it. He could have borrowed money to spend on something else. What else? I don't know. Luke looked at his older brother. You are trying to find a reason to stay angry. Mark slammed the paper on the table. I have the right to be angry. He hid from us that the house was about to be taken by the bank. And why do you think Dad hid it? Because he doesn't trust us. Luke lowered his eyes. Or because Dad knew we didn't have the money to help. That sentence made the room fall silent. Mark looked away. His company had just lost 2 major contracts. Sarah was still paying off student loans and medical bills for her daughter. Luke had only rebuilt his life a few years ago, living on a repairman's salary. None of the 3 could afford to save the house. Perhaps that was what made the truth hurt more. Not because their father didn't ask them, but because if he had asked, they wouldn't have been able to do anything either. Sarah continued taking documents out of the envelope. Under the bank folders were 3 thin paper folders. Each folder was tied with a white string. On the first folder was Mark's name. The second folder said Sarah. The last folder said Luke. Below the 3 folders was a smaller envelope, yellowed by time. The handwriting on it was not mine. It was their mother's handwriting. Sarah recognized it immediately. She touched her fingertips to the line of words, as if touching the hand of the deceased. On the envelope, my wife wrote, to my children, when this house is no longer ours. Sarah started to open it, but Luke reached out to stop her. Dad said to read in order. Mark looked at the folder with his name. The white string was tied in a simple knot. He only needed to pull it slightly to open it. But Mark's hand didn't move. You open it, Sarah said. Why does it have to be me? Because your name is on top. Dad arranged it like this to blame me. Luke looked straight at his older brother. Maybe Dad arranged it like this because the story started with you. Mark looked at Luke for a long time. Then he pulled the string. The folder opened. The first page was a copy of a bank transaction from 12 years ago. Sender, Thomas and Alina Bennett. Recipient, Bennett Home Repairs LLC. Amount, $68,000. Mark did not blink. Bennett Home Repairs was his company. The company that, 12 years ago, was just 1 payroll period away from bankruptcy. The company that Mark always believed was saved by a secret investment his mother took from her retirement fund. He flipped to the next page. There was a copy of the mortgage loan contract. The signing date coincided exactly with the day $68,000 was transferred into the company's account. My signature was at the bottom of the page. Next to it was their mother's signature. There was no signature from Mark. There were no repayment terms. There was only a handwritten piece of paper stapled to the back. Mom's handwriting, "Do not tell Mark. He is trying to keep jobs for 17 people. If he knows we mortgaged the house, he will refuse the money and let the company collapse." Mark read that sentence a second time, then a third time. The chair squeaked as he sat down. "No," he said very softly. Sarah looked at her brother. "Mark, no. Mom said the money came from the retirement account." Luke looked at the contract. "Maybe Mom said that because she knew you wouldn't accept it if you knew the truth." Mark shook his head. But this time, he was no longer angry. There was only fear. He continued flipping the pages. Payroll invoices for 17 workers. Payments to suppliers. Business insurance premiums. Every single payment came from the very loan secured by the house that Mark had just accused his father of selling out of greed. At the end of the folder was a short letter written by me. Mark opened it. The first line was exactly 17 words long note, translating the meaning and structure over word count as it differs in English. "You did not lose your inheritance today, Mark. You received it 12 years ago." Mark read my letter without making a sound. "You did not lose your inheritance today, Mark. You received it 12 years ago." Below were a few more lines. He didn't want to read it, but Sarah reached out and pulled the paper toward herself. "Read it all," she said. Mark clenched his jaw. "I already understand. No. You only just saw the numbers." He looked at his sister, but eventually looked down. "I had written, $68,000 didn't buy success for you. It only bought you more time to save your company yourself. You did the rest. I have never regretted giving you that money. The only thing I regret is letting you believe we could help you without having to trade anything. Your mother wanted you to continue being the man who could pay 17 families. I agreed. But since that day, a part of the house no longer belonged to us." Mark put the letter down. For years, he still talked about the time the company almost went bankrupt as his own personal victory. He had renegotiated contracts, kept the workers, worked 16 hours a day. From a small business with only 3 old trucks, Bennett Home Repairs had grown into a company large enough to take on projects across the county. All of that was true, but now Mark knew that victory was built on a loan his parents silently carried for 12 years. "Dad never mentioned this," he said. Luke looked at his older brother. "Maybe because Dad didn't want every time he looked at you, he saw a debt." Mark turned to the window. Outside, it was completely dark. The sold sign in the yard was just a blurry rectangle under the streetlights. "I can pay it back," Mark said. Sarah shook her head. "To whom? To Dad. The house is already sold. I can return the money." Luke looked at the stack of papers in front of him. Not everything can be fixed by writing a check. Mark stood up abruptly. "Then what do you want me to do? Sit here and cry? I want you to stop turning your shame into anger." That sentence made Mark spin around. For a moment, I thought they were going to fight if I were there. But Sarah put her hand on the table. "Enough." Both fell silent. She looked at the folder with her name on it. The white string was tied more carefully than Mark's folder. I remember tying it 3 times myself, because every time I pulled the knot, the pages inside would slip out. Sarah didn't open it right away. She looked at the small envelope with Mom's handwriting, then at the folder in front of her. "I don't want to know," she said. Mark turned back. "Sarah, if Mom and Dad mortgaged the house to save your company, I don't want to know what they did for me." Luke sat down next to his sister. "We came here to know the truth." "No," Sarah looked around the room. "We came here because we thought Dad betrayed Mom." Her voice broke on the last word. "If I open this, I might find out the ones who betrayed Mom are us." No one answered. Sarah reached out and pulled the string. The folder opened. The first page was not a bank statement. It was a photograph. A little girl about 7 years old lying on a hospital bed, pale skin. A breathing tube running under her nose. On her chest were small electrodes connected to a monitor. It was Grace, Sarah's daughter. The photo was taken 9 years ago. As soon as Sarah saw it, she covered her mouth with her hand. Mark closed his eyes. Even Luke turned his face away. No one in our family needed to be reminded of that night. Grace had fainted during gym class at school. At first, the nurse thought she was dehydrated. But at the local hospital, the doctor discovered her heart rate was abnormal. Less than 3 hours later, Grace was airlifted to a children's hospital in Columbus. The doctor said she had an undetected congenital heart defect. If she didn't have surgery soon, the next time she fainted could be the last. Sarah had called me at 2:17 a.m. I still remember every word she said. "Dad, they told me I have to sign, but I don't understand what they're saying." Alina and I drove for nearly 3 hours in the night. When we arrived, Sarah was sitting on the hallway floor, still in her pajamas and slippers. Her ex-husband was working in another state at the time and couldn't make it back. Alina sat down and hugged our daughter. And I went to find the doctor. That was how our family always operated. Their mother embraced the fear. I went to find what needed to be fixed. Sarah flipped to the second page. It was the estimated cost of treatment, surgery, anesthesia, intensive care unit, helicopter transport, post-surgery heart monitoring. The total cost exceeded $190,000. Insurance covered most of it, but the hospital and the surgeon belonged to 2 different networks. A portion of the claim was denied. After multiple appeals, the amount Sarah's family still owed was $41,280. Sarah looked at that number for a long time. "No," she whispered. Mark stepped closer. "You thought insurance paid it. I thought so too." Sarah kept flipping. Below were 3 letters from the insurance company. The first letter denied the surgeon's fee because he was out of network. The second letter denied part of the transport fee. The third letter accepted the appeal, but only paid an additional small fraction. Finally, there was a copy of a bank check for $41,280, sent directly to the hospital. Payer name, Thomas and Alina Bennett. The check issue date was 4 days after Grace's surgery. Sarah shook her head continuously. Mom said the hospital had a financial assistance fund. No one replied. She said a church organization helped. She began to rapidly flip the pages, as if wanting to find a document proving her parents didn't actually pay that money. But the last page was a copy of a withdrawal from the same mortgage loan. Advance amount, $41,280. The exact same number. The exact same day. Sarah dropped the stack of papers. "Why did they lie to me?" Luke answered very gently, "Because at that time you only cared whether Grace would live or not. But what about after? After she came home? After everything settled?" No one could answer, because that question was not for Mark or Luke. It was for me. Sarah found the small letter clipped at the very back. The handwriting on the envelope was mine. She opened it with trembling hands. "Sarah, You once asked why I didn't sit next to you on the night Grace had surgery. You said Mom was there, while I disappeared for nearly 6 hours. I know you were hurt by that. I also know I never explained. Sarah stopped. Tears fell on the paper. Mark looked at his sister. You used to think Dad wasn't at the hospital. Sarah didn't answer, but I knew she thought exactly that. The day Grace had surgery, Eleanor stayed with Sarah. I left the hospital when it was still dark and returned near noon. Sarah didn't ask where I had gone. She only watched me walk into the waiting room, looked at the coffee cup in my hand, and turned her face away. Years later, during an argument, she once said, "When your granddaughter was lying on the operating table, you could still just walk away." I hadn't argued back. Not because she was right, but because I didn't want her to know where I had gone. Sarah continued reading. I didn't leave because I couldn't handle the fear. I went to the bank as soon as they opened. I begged them to disperse funds from the mortgage line and send the money directly to the hospital. The bank teller said the procedure needed a few days. I sat in his office until they found a way to process it urgently. I didn't say anything because your mother didn't want you to have to choose between Grace's health and the house. She said you would refuse the money if you knew we had to borrow. She was right. Sarah pressed the letter to her chest. I blamed Dad for 9 years. Luke looked down at the table. Did Dad know? Yes, and Dad didn't say anything. Sarah nodded. Her voice was so small it almost disappeared. Dad just said, "Grace is alive. That is enough." The kitchen fell silent. Outside the porch, a car drove slowly down the street. The headlights swept across the window and then vanished. Sarah looked at the photo of Grace on the hospital bed. The little girl in the photo was now 16. She played the cello, hated chemistry, and had just been accepted into the school's debate team. Every heartbeat of Grace was something our family had nearly lost. And for 9 years, Sarah believed her father left the hospital at the moment she needed him most. "I'm calling Dad," Sarah said. She took out her phone. Mark placed his hand on his sister's wrist. "He won't answer. I still have to call." Sarah dialed the number. The phone rang 6 times. No one answered. She called again. Still no one picked up. "Where is Dad?" Sarah asked. Luke looked at the paper under the folders. It was a deposit receipt for a small apartment near St. Anne's Hospital. The move-in date was that very day. But there was another detail that made Luke frown. In the top corner of the receipt, next to my name, there was a handwritten line. "Single-story apartment requested for medical reasons." Luke covered the line with his hand before Sarah could see it. Mark was still looking at his own folder. Sarah was still calling me. No one noticed Luke had pulled the folder with his name closer. The string on the last folder was older than the other 2. The cover had a circular water stain, as if someone had placed a coffee cup on it many years ago. Luke untied the knot. Right on the first page was the logo of a treatment center the whole family recognized. LAKEVAW Recovery Center. Below was the name Luke Bennett. Admission date. Expected discharge date. And a line stamped in red. Insurance stops paying after the 28th day. Luke became motionless. He flipped to the next page. It was a letter the hospital sent to me. If the $28,000 payment is not received by Friday, the patient will be discharged this weekend. Luke reread the date on the letter. He remembered that weekend. That was the day he stood at the rehab center's payphone, called me, and screamed that he wanted to go home. I had said no. He had called me a heartless father. Then he hung up and swore he would never forgive me. Luke looked at the $28,000 figure. Then he looked at the folder, which was even thicker than the first 2. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. Luke did not answer. He flipped to the next page. There was a letter I had written to the director of the treatment center. The first line made all the color drain from Luke's face. "Please do not let my son go home, no matter how much he hates me." Luke reread the first line. "Please do not let my son go home, no matter how much he hates me." Sarah looked at her younger brother. "Luke," he raised his hand, signaling not to speak. The rest of the letter was written in my stiff, slightly slanted handwriting. "My son will say he is cured. He will promise that this time is different. He might cry, get angry, or say I am no longer his father. Please do not believe those words. I have heard them too many times." Luke swallowed hard. 7 years ago, he called me from the treatment center every night. The first day he begged. The third day, he threatened to run away. The sixth day, he said if I really loved him, I had to take him home. I only replied, "You are not ready." Luke screamed into the phone, "You just want to send me away because you're ashamed of me." I didn't deny it, because if I told the truth, Luke would know the insurance stopped paying, and I was borrowing more money to keep him there. He would use that exactly to convince me to take him home. Luke flipped to the next page. A wire transfer receipt, $28,000. Then a second payment. Then a third. Treatment costs, psychological counseling, medication, and the extended recovery program brought the total amount to over $52,000. Mark looked at the numbers. Where did Dad get that much money? Luke already knew the answer. He pulled out the copy of the mortgage limit increase contract. The signing date was only 4 days after his admission. My signature was at the bottom of the page. Next to it was their mother's signature. Luke bowed his head. "I thought Dad didn't visit because Dad hated me." Sarah sat closer. "Did Dad visit?" Luke turned another page. It was a receipt for a cheap motel, less than 2 miles from the treatment center. Every weekend for 3 months, I rented the exact same room. I didn't go in to visit. The treatment specialist said that every time he saw me, Luke begged to go home and refused to participate in therapy for days afterward. So, I just drove there, sat in the pickup truck in the parking lot, waited until his room light turned off, then drove back home the next morning. Luke found a small folded piece of paper at the end of the folder. "Luke, you thought I abandoned you at Lakeview. The truth is I was near you almost every weekend. I just didn't have the courage to walk in because the doctor said my presence made you weak. I let you hate me because that hate kept you in the place that could save your life." Luke's hands began to shake. "I called Dad a coward," he said. No one replied. "I said Mom should have left Dad a long time ago." Sarah held her brother's hand. Luke pulled his hand back. "And he still paid to keep me there." Mark looked at the 3 folders spread on the table. $68,000 for his company, $41,280 for Grace's surgery, over $52,000 to keep Luke in the treatment program. Those funds plus interest had turned the house into a debt larger than any of the 3 had ever imagined. Luke opened my final letter. It was just a short paragraph. "You think I chose the house over you. But when I had to choose, I chose you. I just never told you that the price of that choice was the house." Luke bent over, covering his face with his hands. That was the first time in years Mark saw his younger brother cry. Not out of shame, not out of addiction, but because the father he had spent 7 years blaming had never abandoned him. He had only stood just far enough away so Luke could survive. Sarah looked at the small envelope with Mom's handwriting. 3 folders had been opened. Only the last letter remained. Outside, the church bell chimed at 8 o'clock. Sarah placed her hand on the edge of the envelope. Now we can read Mom's letter. But before she opened it, Mark's phone lit up. A message from the buyer of the house. I just found this in your father's bedroom. Maybe your family needs to see it right away. Mark read the message again. I just found this in your father's bedroom. Maybe your family needs to see it right away. Below was a photo. A small tin box sitting behind a built-in closet drawer. On the lid of the box was Mom's familiar handwriting. For Thomas, when you can no longer go on alone. 10 minutes later, the buyer brought the box over. He didn't ask what had happened. He just placed it on the table and quietly left. Sarah looked at the box, but didn't open it. Instead, she held the envelope Mom left for the 3 siblings. The paper had yellowed. The edge of the envelope was sealed with a small piece of clear tape, exactly the way Mom used to do when she was afraid the glue wasn't strong enough. Sarah pulled the letter out. My dear children, if you are reading these lines, the house probably no longer belongs to our family. I know that will break your hearts. I also know it is very likely you will blame your father. Mark bowed his head. Sarah continued reading. But the loans on the house were not his decision alone. I signed every document. I knew where the money was used. Mark, we used it to keep your company alive. Sarah, we used it so Grace could have the surgery she needed. Luke, we used it to keep you in the place that could save your life, even though you didn't understand it at the time. Luke turned his face away. None of you took our money. We gave it voluntarily. That is what parents do when their child stands on the edge of the abyss. Sarah had to stop to wipe her tears. Towards the end of the letter, Mom's handwriting grew weaker. But Mom and Dad made a mistake. We thought loving meant not letting you see the price that was paid. We hid everything so much that you thought no sacrifice existed. If you are angry at your father because he didn't tell the truth, you have the right to be. But do not mistake his silence for greed. Thomas never knew how to keep anything for himself. That is both the best and the most dangerous thing about him. Sarah looked over at the tin box. The last line of the letter made all 3 freeze. When the house is sold, make sure your father keeps enough money to live on. Don't let him sacrifice the rest of his life and call it love. Mark stood up and opened the box. There was no money inside. Only Mom's watch, a few photos, and a stack of papers from St. Anne's Hospital. Luke picked up the first page. Patient name, Thomas Bennett. The examination date was 4 months ago. In the preliminary diagnosis section were 3 words: early-stage Parkinson's. Sarah took a step back. That's why Dad rented the apartment near the hospital. Mark quickly flipped through the remaining pages. The doctor advised me not to continue living alone in a 2-story house. Hand tremors had appeared. 2 losses of balance. 1 fall on the stairs that I had never told anyone about. At the end of the medical file was a piece of paper written by me. You kids have enough burdens. I can still take care of myself. Don't look for me just because you feel indebted. Mark looked at his phone screen. He had called me 13 times. Sarah called 9 times. Luke wasn't calling anymore. He stood up and grabbed his car keys. I know where Dad is. Mark looked at his younger brother. How do you know? Luke held up the old motel receipt near Lakeview. Because when Dad is scared, he always goes to the place where he used to sit alone waiting for us to survive. For the first time that night, the 3 left the house without arguing. But when they arrived at the parking lot behind the hospital, my pickup truck was there. The car doors were unlocked. The keys were still in the ignition. And I was not inside. Luke ran into the emergency department first. Mark and Sarah followed closely behind, asking for my name at the reception desk, with voices overlapping each other. The nurse checked the computer and looked up. Mr. Bennett is in the observation room. A security guard found him sitting behind the chapel. He fell, but is still conscious. Sarah almost collapsed. When my children entered the room, I was sitting on the hospital bed, a small bandage on my forehead. My jacket was folded at the foot of the bed. Both my hands rested on my knees, but my right hand was still shaking slightly. I looked at the three of them. You opened the envelope. No one answered. Mark stepped forward first. He placed the house sale closing disclosure on the bedside table. You let us believe you took $280,000. I didn't say that. You didn't say the opposite either. I lowered my eyes. You are right. Mark seemed prepared for an argument, but that admission left him not knowing what to say next. Sarah held the medical file. You've had Parkinson's for 4 months. The doctor is still monitoring. You fell twice. I can still get up. Myself, not this time. Sarah's voice broke. Luke had been standing near the door the whole time. Finally, he stepped forward. You sat outside Lakeview every weekend. I looked at my youngest son. Not every weekend, almost every weekend. I didn't deny it. Luke knelt in front of me. Why didn't you go in? Because every time you saw me, you begged to go home. You could have told me later. I thought you survived. That was enough. Luke shook his head. No, Dad, with you. It's always like this. You pay, fix everything, and then disappear before we know what you did. I looked at my 3 children. I just didn't want you to feel indebted. Sarah stepped closer. But you made us think you didn't need us. The room was silent. Mark pulled a chair over and sat facing me. You saved my company. You paid to save Grace. You kept Luke in the treatment center. But when the house was about to be taken by the bank, you didn't make a single call. You didn't have the money to save the house. Maybe, Mark nodded. But you didn't give us the chance to stand beside you when losing it. I turned my face toward the window. All my life, I thought a good father was one who stood between his family and all disasters. I never thought of the day my children grew up and wanted to stand there with me. Sarah held my trembling hand. You saved us, she said. But you didn't give us the chance to save you. For the first time that night, I didn't know how to answer. I just gently squeezed my daughter's hand. And for the first time in many years, I let my children see me afraid. I was discharged the next morning. The doctor told me not to drive for a few days and to have someone with me until the tests were complete. Mark immediately said I would go to his house. I have a spare room upstairs. I just left a 2-story house because the doctor said stairs aren't safe. Mark fell silent. Sarah looked at her brother. Dad's apartment is ready. We will take turns staying there. I was going to object, but Luke had already picked up my bag. This time, you don't get to decide alone. The new apartment was smaller than our old living room. There was only 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchenette, and a window looking down at the hospital parking lot. Mark stood in the middle of the nearly empty room, looking at my 2 suitcases. This is all you kept, enough to use. He turned to me. Where is the remaining $40,300? The apartment deposit. Treatment costs. A portion is in a savings account. You haven't given it to anyone else, have you? I looked at him. Mark bowed his head. I'm sorry, but he knew those 2 words were not enough. That afternoon, Mark sat at the kitchen table, opened his phone, and reread the messages he had sent to our relatives. He had written that I sold the house to enjoy myself, that I betrayed their mother's memory, that no one should trust me with money. Some people had consoled him. Some had called to scold me. Someone even said their mother would be heartbroken if she were alive. Mark opened the family group chat and typed for nearly 10 minutes. Then he handed the phone to me. You read it first. I didn't take it. You said those words publicly. You have to fix them publicly. Mark nodded and pressed send. He wrote that he was wrong. That $280,000 was only the sale price, not the money I kept. That the house was mortgaged to save his company, pay Grace's hospital bills, and help Luke finish his treatment. He didn't blame it on anger. He didn't say it was just a misunderstanding. He wrote, I accused my father before asking what he had to sacrifice. He doesn't owe me an apology. I am the one who owes him the truth. The phone started buzzing continuously. Mark placed it face down on the table. I don't want to read the responses. You should read them. What if they blame me? You let them blame me. Now you must accept your part. Mark looked at me for a long time, then flipped the phone back over. That was the first time I saw my son not trying to run away from his shame. Sarah handled everything differently. She created a new folder, clearly stating, my follow-up appointment schedule, medications to take, apartment expenses, accounts to be paid, doctor's phone number. No more financial secrets, she said. I still have a right to privacy. Privacy, yes. Disappearing alone in a hospital parking lot, no. Luke didn't make spreadsheets or write long apologies. He just came over every Saturday morning. Some days he took me to appointments. Some days we just sat quietly drinking coffee. Once, on the way back, Luke asked, did you ever regret paying for Lakeview? Never, even when I hated you. Love doesn't become wrong just because the person saved doesn't understand it yet. Luke looked out the window. But love shouldn't force someone to be lonely either. I didn't answer, because this time, my son was right. A month later, Mark brought over a stack of papers. He had opened a family care account and transferred the first payment into it. $800, he said. I'll transfer it every month. I don't need you to pay me back. This is not paying off a debt. Then what is it? Mark looked at my slightly trembling hands. It's my part of the work. I was going to refuse out of habit. But then I remembered Eleanor's words. Don't let him sacrifice the rest of his life and call it love. I signed the medical power of attorney that Sarah prepared, accepted the spare key Luke placed on the table, and let Mark pay for the first month's medication. Not because I had become weak, but because I finally understood that a family isn't held together by one person, always standing in the front to block everything. It is held together when everyone steps up, before the strongest person falls. 6 months later, the whole family ate dinner together, around the old wooden table that Luke had fixed up. Mark brought food. Sarah checked my medication. Grace played the cello in the living room. And Luke sat beside me, talking about a newcomer to the rehab program he was helping. On the way home, we passed by the old house. A young family was hanging lights on the porch. A little boy ran on the lawn, while the mother stood by the kitchen window, where Eleanor used to hang the yellow curtains. Sarah asked, "Does it hurt, Dad?" I looked at the house for a long time. Yes, then I smiled. But it is still doing its job right. It is sheltering a family. I took the piece of wood, with the height marks out of my pocket. Mark put his hand on my shoulder. Luke stood on my left. Sarah held my trembling hand. I used to think I lost the house for $280,000. The truth is the house had saved us many times before it left. And only after losing it did we learn how to become a real family. This story was inspired by real situations that many families have experienced. The names, places, and some details have been changed to protect privacy and help the story be told more fully. There are fathers who do not know how to say words of love. They only know how to wake up earlier, work longer, sign loans that no one sees, and silently stand behind every time their child thinks they have weathered the storm on their own. But sometimes, the unspoken sacrifice becomes a distance. The one left behind thinks they are protecting the family, while the ones being protected think they have never been loved. Thomas lost the house that contained his entire life. But it was on the very day that house no longer belonged to him that his children understood it had been given to them, piece by piece long before. Perhaps we cannot keep every roof, cannot hold on to time, nor can we take back words spoken in anger. But while we still have a chance, we can choose to ask before judging, listen before turning away, and say words of love before an envelope has to explain everything for us. If you have ever misunderstood your parents' silence or realized a sacrifice too late, please share your story in the comments section. Because sometimes, a sincere confession today can heal what a whole family has carried for many years. Thank you for listening. And please don't wait until the house becomes empty to tell your loved ones that they have always been your home.